This was a stock that was on a tear really the last couple of weeks. I mean, it had risen about 16, 17%, and a lot of people wanted to know whether we were going to see that justified by the results that we got today. Were they?
I mean, for the bulls, it's a dream quarter.
Yeah.
Because they delivered, not just in terms of the quarter, but the outlook. You look at what we see in cybersecurity in terms of Fortinet, Checkpoint, now Palo bodes well for Zscaler. We obviously had the CrowdStrike black eye, but this is a golden age for cybersecurity being led by Palo Alto.
Being led by Palo Alto. So if I'm looking at this as an investor, you think this is the market leader in terms of pure play cybersecurity companies?
Cable pounder. It's just the start in terms of where we see this going. Platformization, Nikesh, one of the best CEOs out there. That's why, look, this is a quarter. They should print this out, put it in the Louvre. It's another sort of masterpiece in terms of where I see the Palo Alto story going.
Well, yeah. Is there anything in here that looked somewhat concerning to you? Because there's a lot of players in this space. And we've been talking about consolidation in the cybersecurity sector. And certainly Palo Alto Networks is a buyer right now. But is there anything in here that maybe gives you pause?
I think to some extent, there was some nervousness going in, despite the stock, just nervousness in terms of the overall space. You look at what Nikesh is seeing, especially even off quarter. This for bulls in tech, for bulls in cybersecurity, this is exactly what we want to see. But I do believe consolidation, this is just a drum roll. Get out the popcorn. We're going to have a lot of M&A in cybersecurity. You thought about that Google Wiz deal, which ultimately didn't happen. But this is a start. There'll be an acquirer, but there's going to be many acquirees in terms of where I see in the sector.
What about a company like Microsoft buying more of its own cybersecurity capabilities? Because right now, these are kind of add-on services when you already subscribe to Microsoft's software, right?
Yeah. Well, especially when look what's happened in the cloud. I think Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they will aggressively potentially look at cybersecurity. And also when you think about the overall FTC con, wherever that heads from an antitrust perspective, potentially more M&A in big tech, stronger and going to get stronger. And if you look at what's happened in cybersecurity, this is really one of the best barometers in terms of what we see in overall IT spend. We'll have Salesforce and some others, but if you're a bull from from an overall tech perspective, this is exactly what you wanted to hear in terms of barometer.
I am curious in terms of the IT spend. I've heard people basically say that a lot of corporations, they don't actually want necessarily a bundled cybersecurity product, meaning, if you fold that in with the Microsoft, to them that makes it less attractive. They want some separation. Are you finding that to be true?
No doubt. I mean, pure play is of one. That's why if you go into a typical server room, you'll see 25 cybersecurity software pieces in there. But look, Palo Alto, what they're essentially doing is platformization. They're trying to benefit more and more. They're just continuing to expand in terms of what they're seeing.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, the strategy that the CEO is taking here. Because when I hear that platform, I think, is that kind of sort of like add-on products and services? I mean, what does that look like? What are they trying to turn themselves into?
It's really about the shift to the cloud. Because
to the cloud,
take a step back. More and more data moving to the cloud. AI revolution. That has to be protected. Cybersecurity is going to be a second, third derivative of the AI revolution. So Palo Alto, they continue to play chess while others play checkers. And I think what they're doing is really skating to where this is all going. And look, for this quarter, remember, you go back, they had 2 quarters ago, they had a pretty soft quarter. This is a huge validation.
I was always good at chess, but I sucked at checkers, and I can
really?
never forget. I think it's because I overanalyze everything, which works well in chess. But with checkers, I mean, it's
we should play checkers one day.
I want to see you guys play Chinese checkers.
Who knows?
Let's just broaden this out to overall technology, because earnings season is pretty much over. I know we have these cybersecurity companies, a lot of enterprise software companies, but it feels like we're kind of in a quiet period waiting for Nvidia next week. Have people made adjustments to their Nvidia numbers based on what we saw from, say, the Microsoft, say, the Alphabets, and everyone else who, didn't quite live up to expectations with the AI spending?
Yeah, you've seen it, but even when in Microsoft, they guide strong on the Azure growth in terms of second half, you've seen numbers tick up for Nvidia. But look, it all comes down to hearing from the godfather of AI, Jensen, Nvidia. I think it's going to be a drop the mic moment. I think another sort of validation for where we see AI spend. And from a tech perspective, you put all these pieces together. Unless you have binoculars or a telescope, hard to find the recession here, especially when it comes to big tech.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the tech sector. When you talk to your clients, what's the company they ask you most about?
probably the Messi of AI, Palantir, because that's been one, from an AI perspective, I think many viewed it in the background, now really front and center in terms of use cases, what we're seeing, I think not just in terms of the quarter, but now we're seeing what's the second derivative in software? Is it ServiceNow, Microsoft, Oracle, and Palantir, I think probably one of the best purest play AI names out there.
It's interesting to look at the companies you cover. By the way, you have a very eclectic a mix of companies that you cover. I'm not sure how you're able to convince your bosses of that, but you do a great job. But one thing that I notice is you seem to be covering a lot of companies that are really kind of on this inflection point in various technologies, whether it's AI or autonomous driving and EVs and things like that here. When you look at where we are, and I'm talking about from an investor perspective, and where you want to be, and where we think what the world is going to look like, and more importantly, what the stock market's going to look like, and who's going to dominate it here. Do you think we should be looking at the established companies like the Nvidias and Microsofts, et cetera, or is there going to be a new crop of companies that comes in and maybe eats their lunch sometime soon?
Well, I think the strong get stronger in terms of big tech, but there are going to be companies that will become household names because you start to think about this is the biggest tech trend, biggest transformation we've seen since the start of the internet, 1995. And when you look at $1 trillion of incremental CapEx, that's why there's names like Palantir. There's some other software names out there that will be the next sort of generation. But when it comes to Nvidia, Microsoft, big tech, strong get stronger in the AI revolution.
What's the company that gives you most pause right now when you look at big tech?
Look, I think most pause is probably Intel, because that's one, if you looked up disaster in the dictionary, you'd see Intel's ticker. And that's one, despite you call it a value trap, it just shows have and have nots. You got the godfather of AI, Jensen, with his black leather jacket. Then you have Intel, which is just dog ate the homework.
Yeah, they're struggling to find their way right now, certainly.
Struggling would be a compliment.